I am Edward Montgomery. I'm the next speaker. I go by Sandy. My co-author in this paper is Dr. Juliet Greshik. He lives in Boulder, Colorado. What I'm going to talk about today is an outshoot of some research that was done about 10 years ago under a NASA program on solar sails. At that time, we looked around at various different ways of putting a sail together, and Dr. Greshik had some interesting ideas. We hired some folks to do scaling laws about how booms and sheets of sails went up in mass as you raised them and made them larger, different sizes. So we got some basic scaling algorithms to tell us how that would work and how well it would work, and try to get some optimums. And out of that kind of study, you end up getting some guidance on what's the most, what's a better way to put a sail together, or what works more optimally. Part of that knowledge went through Dr. Greshik into the Lagarde striped net configuration, which is, I think, eventually what was behind the Sunjammer program before it was canceled. All right. As we mentioned, trips to the interstellar medium take a lot of energy. You're right, a lot of speed. We've talked about getting some incident radiation momentum exchange from either solar or laser systems. The major challenge has been shown to be constructing gossamer sails of very large areas with very little mass. Conventional large sailcrafts are composed of a single very large sheet and the heavy booms that form the load path. If you have a large sheet, it's intercepting a photon stream. All points on that sheet are loaded. If you have any single mass points then connected to that sheet, like a payload, then that's usually supported then by booms to carry that load. That pressure load has to be connected to all the mass points that it's pulling along through space. So you ended up with boom technology being a very important part to consider when you're putting your sail together. You've heard Jim Benford in the first day talked about even if you distribute all your components of your payload evenly into one sail, you have some dynamic stability problems in what he looked at. So guidance and control by the techniques that we've looked at also become very problematic when you get to very large systems. Shift in the center of mass, if Ben Dietrich maybe discussed that in some of the NEA Scout stuff. If you shift the center of pressure and center of mass dynamically with motion in the vehicle, you have to move things further. If you have a bigger sail, you have to move more mass or move it further. So those systems become bigger. Okay, what are the sails we need? Well, I mean, we need at least this. Dr. Montgomery just showed something that was an order of magnitude better than that, and that may be right. She found that to be not quite adequate to do the job. So we know we need sails that are very, very low in density. The concepts we've seen talked about most are things that start about a kilometer on a side. Square sails are a kilometer or a diameter, whichever way you want to look at it. Interesting, both laser propulsion methods and solar approach methods both have to be designed to take large thermal loading, because as Greg Matloff showed, the best way to launch a solar sail, if it's strictly solar, is to go close to the sun, to do a sun diver approach. So it's going to get very hot either close to the sun or very hot from a laser. Either way you do it, that's the best way to do it. And when you do have a lot of photons, and you have a big thermal load, you have a big structural load. You're putting a big pressure load into the sail that has to be driven by that boom. You know, the size of sails we have now are like, built like 30 square meters. There's an 85 square meter sail going on now in NEA Scout. Sunjammer, I think, was a couple hundred square meters or something like that in size. Didn't really get launched. Aerial densities we're looking at are around 25 to 300 grams per square meter, a whole lot off of that. There's a big technology change. Yeah, the polyimide sails that we use now, and I've worked with the company and built those that for both the NEA Scout and worked on the sun shield for James Webb, where a thin sheet was important there. And those getting below 100 micron thickness sails is a real technology leap. I don't think we have any idea how we're going to do that. It's pretty tough. But that fellow right there, Greg Lau, could tell you more maybe how to do that. But anyway, so even when you get very large sails, handling becomes, even the sails we're doing now, handling is very important. There's a lot of details on how you handle them, how you manufacture them, how you put them together. And when you get to something like a kilometer on the side, it's hard to imagine how you would ever make that work on the ground. And even the self-weight of deflection causes kind of secondary problems of dealing with these things in orbit. So anyway, how do you solve that? Well, Dr. Gresham came up with an idea. Instead of building one very large sheet, you build a lot of small sheets and you connect them together. You all may have seen these kind of kites like this, or a string of kites that are held together. Kind of the same sort of concept working for you there. And we looked at that for a while. We did a quick study or two back in 2007 and published some on that. But yeah, this is basically you have a spacecraft mast down at the bottom, and you have a series of sails connected by, and these have to be very strong, very lightweight, very thin fibers, holding these sails, and these sails have to be very, very lightweight as well. And the sunlight then comes at these, you think, well, this one's going to shallow this one. Well, actually, this thing flies at an angle to the sunlight so that this is not blocked by that one. And if you're familiar with the way most orbital trajectories work with solar sails anyway, rarely are you flying normal anyway. So that really isn't that much of a detriment. Couple of ways that you can control a string of kite sails like this thing is slew your payload mass around and try to change again that pressure, center of pressure and center of mass. Or, and the alternative that we both ended up preferring is just the lead sail is the one you control like you would any other normal large sail, and just let the rest of the stack follow it. And there were a couple of papers done after this that looked into some of the dynamics that were control dynamics associated with that. So why do we want to do this? Why is this a good idea? Well, Zeiders and Canfield showed in these scaling laws I talked about that the root diameter of the booms, and the bigger a diameter of a boom you have, the heavier it's going to be. But that root diameter of that boom has to grow for larger sails. Its mass per unit length has got to grow. And it has to do that to hold the solar pressure and to provide that lump mass. That's not true with this toe, it's called. In particular, the Canfield showed that the cross-section of the boom diameter goes as the area moment of inertia, and that grows by the square of the boom length. So the bigger sail you got, that boom's got to get larger. If you have a smaller sail, that boom doesn't have to be as large. So if you chop it up into smaller sails, you have smaller root diameters, and ultimately you have less mass in there. And also, when you're looking at, and this is an issue that kind of comes up on these long missions, you don't want to have your sheet coming back and flapping against the boom or touching things, especially if they're very gossamer structures and they're out there for a very long time. So you need to keep that shape of that sail you need to make sure those things aren't working against each other, and to keep that kind of distributed tension in the sheet, it can come up to a 1/5 power of the boom diameter. So there's a very high premium for that. Dr. Gresham in this paper did an early trajectory study of what one of these tow sails would do. He looked at 2,000 square meters of a tow sail. It was 400 panels, each of them 5 square meters in area. He used called a placate boom, which that's basically what that looks like. It's kind of a little bit stiffer section put in place of the basic sheet. So in this particular mission, they were carrying the structure weighed only 2.7 kilograms for that whole stack. And considering he didn't really optimize the steering law on it, but he just put a constant 30-degree angle with respect to the sun. And this thing took off and went this 10 AU orbits about where Saturn is, out to Saturn's orbit. So it took about 5 years to get out there, and when it looped back around, it kind of came back in the orbit after 33 years. So it takes you about 80 years to get to escape. So it was still a long trajectory. Again, as was just mentioned, if you want to go faster, the numbers get really tough. So this is a way to look at it. So I had another thought. Well, what's new? Why do we want to bring it new? I've been working on the NEA Scout mission. I said, well, what if I wanted to do something that was near term, to go out there and look at the practicality, put one of these tow sails in orbit and see what it would do? Would that match any kind of mission parameter that NASA's using? At the time, NASA had put out a technology plan where they're looking at sails to do missions to some of the outer solar system and of a certain mass, which I've used in the trade study. But just to review, Near-Earth Asteroid Scout is a 6U CubeSat packed sail system. The sail area is a little bit over 80 square meters. It's going out to this object 1991 VG, which is near a long track in Earth's orbit, about 1 AU away from here. Les said yesterday this is a 2019 launch now, but it's going to be a secondary payload on EM1. This is what the bus looks like. The sail is packaged in this region. This is all the other components of star trackers. And what's kind of important about this bus, it's based on the Interplanetary Nano Spacecraft Pathfinder and Relevant Environment, the INSPIRE bus that JPL built. But it's a CubeSat version of something that can navigate interplanetary space. It has the components in it takes to communicate, survive, do the kind of guidance and control it takes to do in interplanetary space, and that's what NEA Scout's going to demonstrate. It'll be the first one to do that. So this is a kind of a current technology look at what kind of system it would look like. And a package of one of those sails, that 85 square meter sails, is a 14 centimeter by 11 centimeter by 23 by 24 centimeter kind of package. And just as a thought process, I said, well, what if we take a stack of those and put them together and made each one of these be one of the tow sails? And if you do the math and add things up, the total sail materials here, the track booms that would deploy them would be this. A deployer would take about that kind of mass, and the sail spoon there, and these, well, I'm sorry, I'm backing up. This is actually what one unit weighs, 3.5 kilograms. I'm sorry, one unit. Next chart's where I went and looked at what happens if I then take 12 of these sails and put them out there. And here's where the masses come out. The sails themselves, 12 times that 3.5 is 42.6 kilograms. Add some weight for the tow, because I've now put these together in a package, but that's really a pretty small number, because that tow, just those fibers, carbon fibers, really weigh very little. I added another 10% margin, took what the current weight of the bus was, the same 6U bus, and put that on there. And the instructions in the NASA call was to fit in a 150 kilogram package. Well, that left 73 kilograms for payload after all that. The other thing is you could reduce that and put a lot more sails on there and go faster. Haven't done that trade yet, but I think it's interesting. It just kind of demonstrated there was some trade space there. 5 minutes. Okay, thank you. Here's basic calculations of what kind of acceleration you could expect from that kind of a package. And millimeters per second squared, it's pretty low number, especially out at 1 AU. Again, take your time to get there. If you go in closer to the sun, you get a higher acceleration and a quicker mission. And this is kind of looked at what happens if you start tacking a bunch of other sails on it. As you know, the more mass you add, though, the less acceleration you get. So there's a kind of after a while, there's a diminishing return of tacking more sails onto that tow. It still continues, but you want to work up here right in the knee of the curve so you're not adding more system to get just a little more acceleration. Okay, so that's what I've given you is a look at what a 6U would look like. Shows you that there are some solar system escape velocities that are probably possible for this configuration, and that there's a design heritage that could probably be accessed very near future to do a mission with this kind of a system. And that's it.
You mentioned that it might be very difficult to launch a sail from the Earth with a very low area, by the mass to area ratio. There might be a way to do it. A number of years ago, Giancarlo Genta, who's here working with Giovanni Volpetti, talked about the idea of replacing the normal, stable, well-behaved plastic substrate with something that would evaporate when exposed to solar UV.
Yeah,
So
yeah. That concept of putting basically the coating out there and letting the substrate has been proposed, I don't know, 20 years ago, and tried in a few places, but I don't think it's ever been, to me, demonstrated very, very realistically. I hope we can.
But it might be an interesting experiment to try it on a CubeSat and see how it works. If
Maybe.
it works.
Okay. Yeah, Robert?
Hey, so it's interesting, all this discussion of sails makes me think about actual sailing. I grew up on sailboats, and you know, historically, you know, you had the old boats that had to go downwind because they just had a big sail up there, and that was about the only direction you could go. Then they invented the sloop where you could go kind of across the wind, and now the interesting thing is that if you have one of those boats, your fastest point of sail is not going downwind, it's actually going kind of across the wind. You can actually go faster than the wind. So it does require a keel. So I don't know what you could do to implement a keel and actually go faster than the wind on a solar sail.
The physics is different.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Thank you. Appreciate it.